Hi, this is Courtney Jablonski, Project Coordinator within the Office of Teacher and Leader Effectiveness Policy and Programs. This webinar was originally shared with STLE grantees on December 20th, 2013. In an effort to make this valuable information more accessible to others, we've recorded the following exploration of how student perception surveys can promote excellence in teaching and learning through actionable student feedback. Our conversation will start today with coming to an understanding as to why student perception surveys are a great fit with the work around the TLE continuum and other STLE-based initiatives. From there, we'll explore the continuum of student surveys and look specifically at a survey that's approved for use in the New York State APPR system. We'll wrap up the session with an overview of additional resources available for those interested in learning more about the use of student perception surveys. The original webinar was co-facilitated by Julia Rafel-Bear, Ha-Mei Vu, and myself. Most importantly, we had STLE recipients from both STLE 1 and STLE 2 cohorts, representing a wide portion of our state. The graphic on the following slide will provide you with additional insight into where your fellow grantees come from. As you know, the goal of STLE is to encourage and support districts and public charter schools as they develop, implement, and/or enhance career ladders as part of a comprehensive system approach to recruitment, development, retention, and equitable distribution of effective school teachers and leaders as part of their implementation of the annual professional performance review system required by Education Law 3012C. The map on this slide illustrates that there are over 100 districts participating in rounds 1 and 2 of the grant, with over another 50 eligible districts who have applied to round 3. Our office is committed to promoting the extended influence of our most effective educators through the sharing of best practice and research-based initiatives with and across our grantees. This webinar is specifically focused on the cutting-edge use of student perception surveys in feedback and evaluation. Surveys can provide important feedback regarding teacher and leader behaviors, the classroom environment, and school climate that can serve as powerful complements to your grant activities and initiatives such as coaching, mentoring, instructional modeling, evaluations, and so on. Integrating student survey results with high-quality classroom observations and other student measures can help further enhance feedback loops and evaluations. Ha-Mei Vu is a fellow with the Regents Research Fund who works collaboratively with NYSET to lead a grant-funded project called the Demonstration District Project, or DDP. This project supports 5 districts in New York to implement their APPR plans while piloting at least one of 2 innovative approaches to getting teachers additional feedback: classroom-based videos and/or the use of student perception surveys. As part of this project, she's worked with educators in the DDP districts to learn more about the research behind student perception surveys and supporting them with both administering and, more importantly, using the data from these surveys to influence instructional and programmatic decisions. She formerly worked at the New York City Department of Education as a project manager on the Measures of Effectiveness Teaching Project, which was a large-scale research project aimed at finding the best, most reliable ways to measure teacher effectiveness. One of the theories being tested in the MET project is that student perception surveys could tell us a lot about teacher effectiveness. Findings and insights from these projects will be shared with you throughout the presentation. Our goal is to give you some information about different types of student perception surveys, the research findings about surveys, including whether student feedback is valid and reliable, and also offer you some suggestions and strategies for implementing surveys within your own district, whether formatively for professional development purposes or as part of your APPR. As we already mentioned, Student Perception Survey is an innovative way to gather additional feedback for teachers and school leaders. While there's a lot of evidence supporting the use of student perception surveys, I do want to begin this conversation with some caveats. Although student perception surveys have been in use for at least the last decade, it's only in the last few years that we really studied their use and effects, and only a few years since they have been formally adopted for use in teacher or principal evaluation anywhere in the U.S. There is much left to learn from those districts and states that are the pioneers of this work, and much that we can still improve on, particularly in how student surveys are administered and how the results are used to improve educator practice. Student perception surveys offer an additional lens from which we can gather information and answer some critical questions, such as why do some classrooms or schools produce more learning than others, even with similar students? What aspects of teaching practice make some teachers more effective at helping students learn? Can student observations and experiences be used as a valid source of feedback for teachers and principals? Why might you want to consider student perception surveys? What may they tell you that you don't already know about teacher or principal practice? Well, for one, students are in a teacher's classroom every day and thus are the most frequent observers of a teacher's practice, more than any other colleague or administrator could possibly observe the teacher in practice. In some ways, students may be able to offer more insight around the classroom, the teacher, and instruction than anyone else who comes into contact with the teacher professionally. Second, when questions are asked appropriately and specifically, student feedback has the potential to offer important information for teachers and school leaders about what they are perceived to be doing well and where students have shared their perceptions on room to grow. Third, as already mentioned, student survey is one additional measure of teacher practice that complements other measures. It's one additional set of feedback that complements other sets of feedback. New York State's APPR system emphasizes the use of multiple measures of educator effectiveness, and we believe that student surveys have the potential to be a very strong measure within those multiple measures. So, what can you do with the results from student perception survey data? Research and practice point to several different and important uses. Results can be used to support individual growth. For example, the results can be used as additional feedback for educators to give concrete suggestions for change in practice. It could be used as discussion points with coaches, mentors, colleagues, and students. While these practices could be particularly helpful for new teachers and principals as part of their mentoring or coaching, they could also be powerful ways to continuously grow our more experienced teachers and principals. Results could also be used for school and/or district professional development and growth. The results could be used to compare trends, patterns, and responses across the school or the district, to help identify teachers or schools with high survey results and high student achievement, to find ways to leverage these individuals and/or practices. The results could help identify areas related to instruction, management, classroom culture, or personal leadership where educators could benefit from greater professional development and prioritize those areas to maximize educator impact and student learning. I hope you're beginning to see how student perception survey results can be useful for you and your district. You're probably also beginning to question whether research supports the use of student surveys. Here's a short summary of what we know. Students have the most contact with teachers and are the direct consumers of a teacher service. Multiple measures provide more information and a more robust definition of teacher effectiveness. Student feedback can provide information that helps teachers improve their practice. And student feedback allows for a more robust definition of teacher effectiveness. Surveys are the most obvious way to gain student feedback, but even surveys can fall on a continuum from something very organic and informal to something much more structured and formal. A youth-led organization in Denver, Colorado, called Voice, advocate for what they call fast, frequent feedback. They work with volunteer teachers, mostly from middle and high schools, who select a few students in their classes. They work with students to write a few questions that they want to pose to the class on a very regular basis, such as daily or weekly. The questions are often about teachers' instructional practices, the classroom culture, or what students are learning. They're designed with the intention that the results will be analyzed very quickly, and it's expected that the teacher will be very transparent about the specific changes being made in the classroom based on the student feedback. Some of the really exciting things about this approach are that students are truly engaged because they know they're contributing to the changes in their classroom. Also, teachers come to believe that students can truly give valuable feedback. Open and honest conversations take place between teachers and students when they're discussing the reasons for the feedback and not just the feedback themselves. And lastly, it's a low-cost, non-intensive way to get kids involved and for teachers to get better. As we move along the continuum, some of you will recognize surveys you probably already administer. School climate, anti-bullying, or character education surveys are quite common these days. Though not necessarily as organic as the FFF, These types of surveys are designed to give you some specific information that you can act on. They're typically short and relatively easy to administer because you can give just one to each student and analyze at the school or grade level. They'll give you some great insights about what your students as a whole group are thinking, experiencing, or worrying about. Often, schools or districts compile their own results, but they may not be able to compare their responses to similar schools, districts, or the national norms. At the far end of the continuum are student surveys that are research-based, nationally normed, and can be linked to a specific teacher or principal, and may be approved to be used to evaluate their effectiveness. The tripod surveys and the K-12 Insight are two that are approved by New York State to be used in evaluation, though at this point the K-12 Insight is only approved to be used for principal evaluations. You'll need to contract with a vendor to administer the surveys and analyze the responses for you. You should pay very special attention to the specific teacher and student linkages and be strategic about which students will provide feedback for which teachers where you're departmentalized. The questions in the survey will likely be identical to those asked to all other students across the country, which presents the benefits of allowing you to compare your teacher or schools to those across the country. The vendor will typically send you back reports for individual teachers and schools within your district. The results will often be compared to that of a comparison cohort of your choosing, which could be all teachers or schools in your own district or the national norms. No matter what types of student feedback you decide to gather, it is suggested that teachers and principals spend a great deal of time analyzing the data. It's not enough just to ask kids what they think. What's important is to use the results to meaningfully grow and develop as educators. You can ask the following questions of any type of student feedback data that you gain. What do you notice about these results? What can you learn from the results? Does anything surprise you? What are you most proud of? Why do you think your students feel this way? How do these results compare to other sources of information about your practice or your program? Once you've spent time looking at your results, don't just put them away. Teachers and principals looking at their individual results should reflect to determine the priority areas for growth. Schools and districts looking at their overall results can also do the same using aggregate data. It's recommended that educators talk to each other about the results. Discuss how these results are different or similar to the other feedback that you've gotten through observations, school visits, student learning outcomes, professional development activities, etc. Because teachers or principals receive the feedback from their students, it's logical for them to go back and talk to their students about what was learned from the feedback. If the results were particularly puzzling or surprising, the teacher or principal may want to ask students how they interpreted the questions that were asked. Did that interpretation match what the teacher or principal intended to ask? Or perhaps the teacher or principal may want to talk to the students about how they're perceiving the teacher or principal's actions versus the intentions. There's a lot of value in understanding not just what students said, but why they said what they did. Getting the additional insights may help educators make more concrete plans for addressing student concerns or creating development plans. So far, we've discussed student perception surveys in general and the different ways to gather and make use of student feedback. Let's now look specifically at the Tripod Student Survey, which are approved for use in the New York State APPR system for teachers and principals. These are also approved to be used in the New York State DTSDE review process for focus districts. The Tripod Survey was created and refined at Harvard University over 10 years ago by Dr. Ron Ferguson. It's tailored for grade levels K through 2, 3 through 5, and 6 through 12. It's designed to help assess teachers' content knowledge, pedagogy, and relationship building skills. It allows students to assess their classroom experience with each teacher across 7 dimensions, often referred to as the 7 C's. The surveys are administered through Cambridge Education. The Tripod Survey asks students to assess their classroom experience with a specific teacher across 7 dimensions, or the 7 C's. Ron Ferguson refers to the first 5 C's as the support C's. Students respond to their experience around the teacher's ability to care, captivate, confer, clarify, and consolidate knowledge. The last 2 C's are called the press C's. These reflect how a teacher challenges students and controls behavior. Not all C's are created equal. Although they're all important and each adds an additional lens about the teacher's ability and practice, Research has shown that clarifying, challenging, and controlling are most predictive of student learning outcomes. In other words, teachers who score high on these C's also tend to have high student learning outcomes. Just as was mentioned about the survey use in general, the tripod surveys can offer some really great insights into teacher practice, student engagement, school climate, and youth culture. The tripod surveys come in 3 different levels: K through 2, 3 through 5, and 6 through 12. The versions vary in length and vocabulary, but all focus on the 7 C's. You'll notice that some items do remain identical across all grade levels. I want to pause and give you a chance to read some of the questions on the K through 2 student surveys. It's important to note that the K through 2 tripod survey is meant to be read aloud to students, and the students should answer each statement as either yes, sometimes, or maybe, depending on the STEM, or no. On the 3 through 5 and the 6 through 12 versions, students are now being asked to answer each item as totally true, mostly true, somewhat, mostly untrue, or totally untrue. You'll notice that the vocabulary gets a bit more complex and the ideas are more complex. I'll pause again for you to read through the questions. Finally, here are some sample questions posed to the 6 through 12 students. Hopefully you've noticed that none of the questions ask about how much students like or dislike a teacher. The questions are targeted to provide insight into practice that would be evident in a classroom, rather than opinions about likability. One of the most important questions you should ask is whether a survey you are using is valid and reliable. There's a lot of evidence out there to show that the tripod surveys are. The tripod project has been developed and refined over more than a decade to achieve a high level of reliability. Tripod surveys and analysis methods have helped millions of students communicate about their experiences in school. Analysis of tens of thousands of surveys in multiple districts had shown that less than 1% of students answered the survey in a biased manner. This is very important because it dispels the myth that students are out there to get their teachers and that they'll answer positively for teachers that they like and negatively for those that they do not. Earlier I alluded to the Measures of Effectiveness Teaching Project. This project was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and took place over the span of 2 years. 3,000 teachers in 6 districts volunteered to participate in the study. The purposes of the study were to identify different measures that could be used to gauge teacher effectiveness and finding the right weight and balance for multiple measures used within teacher evaluation. The MET project found that teachers' student survey results are predictive of student achievement gains. That is, students know an effective classroom when they experience one. Student surveys have been shown to produce more consistent results than classroom observations or student learning outcomes. And student feedback and teacher observations combined were more closely correlated with teacher effectiveness than observations alone or any number of other attributes of teachers, such as their certification, their master's degree, etc. The MET project is the largest of its kind, and how effective student surveys were in differentiating teacher effectiveness was one of the most important results. In the last several years, many districts and states have incorporated tripod student perception surveys in their practice, formatively or for evaluative purposes. The tripod is definitely the most widely used and widely researched student perception survey on the market right now, although the supply will rise to meet the increasing demand. When you contract with Cambridge Education to administer the tripod surveys, you will also receive individual teacher and school reports. These individual reports look very similar. They will graphically show you the percentage of students assigned to that teacher or that school who answered an item in a particular way. For 3 through 5 and 6 through 12 students, because they choose among 5 options, you'll see how many answered each of the 5 options. Most often, the totally true is converted to favorable 5 and shown as dark green and so on, unless it's a negatively worded item, and in that case, totally untrue is converted to favorable 5 and are shown as dark green. K2 students only had 3 options to choose from when they answer, so you'll see how many answered each of the 3 options. The bottom half of this slide shows some sample results for a teacher. At the end of the colorful bar is a sum, percent of favorable responses. This adds up the 2 green bars. The percent favorable responses boxes are particularly important in these tripod result reports. The second thing you'll get to see in the report summary is a summary of how the teacher or the school scored on all 7 C's collectively and each of the C's respectively. In this sample report, the school's 7C score is 70%. That means that 70% of students in that school selected the favorable responses across all items on the survey. Underneath that are the favorable percentages for each of the 7 C's. 87% of students in the school selected the favorable responses across all items about care, and then so on. The report will also go into each item within the C. Here again, we see that the school had 87% favorable for care, but the school will definitely want to dig deeper into each statement under care and see how students responded to different statements. This exercise can provide some truly great insights about practice that, if were changed, revised, developed, may have high leverage. Again, research shows that surveys are useful as one of multiple ways to view teacher effectiveness. The reports gained from the tripod survey can help you make decisions about where to prioritize support and provide professional development resources. But there's often skepticism from educators when they're first introduced to the idea of student surveys. Most of the skepticism is due to misinformation or improper administration from the first time around. You'll see here some of the most common myths around student perception surveys as shared with us by districts who have pioneered this work. Myth 1. Students shouldn't be evaluators. Teachers should only be evaluated by professional evaluators. Fact. Student surveys have been shown to produce more consistent results than classroom observations. Myth 2. Students use the surveys to get their teachers. Fact. Less than 1% of students found to have responded in a biased manner. Myth 3. K through 2 and 3 through 5 surveys are too confusing and too long. Fact. The surveys have been refined over 10 years in hundreds of classrooms. The surveys take most students 20 to 30 minutes, and the items are understood by the vast majority of students in that age group. Myth 4. Some students took the survey multiple times for multiple teachers. Fact. While this may be true, schools make their own decisions about which classes to survey for which teachers. It's recommended that students do not complete the survey for more than 2 to 3 teachers during any administration cycle. Myth 5. Teachers don't know what's on the survey or have limited training on administering the survey. Fact. All tripod survey items used in the MET project are available online. If you're considering implementing student surveys in whatever form, and we hope that you'll explore this option, we want to share with you some best practices so that you can avoid some of the common pitfalls that others have made. Create buy-in. Make sure that teachers, students, and administrators alike understand the research and how results can be used to improve practice. Try it out. Start with teacher and students created fast, frequent feedback cycles to increase the value of student feedback. Or pilot the tripod with a selected group of teachers and hold PLCs. Work through the logistics and challenges such as administrative windows, timing, etc. Develop teacher capacity to analyze their individual results with particular focus on the strengths and areas for improvement. And most importantly, share the learning. Be transparent about the changes taking place as part of the reflection and development. As you know, districts have the option of including student surveys in their APPR. If you decide to take up that option, the following are additional recommendations. Districts may initially use the process of administrating survey, analyzing results, and creating action plans as evidence of New York State teaching standard on professional growth. You may even want to spend a year or two piloting using the student surveys as New York City is doing. It's a great way to work out some of the implementation issues. Over time, the district may be ready to use student results, such as the percent of favorable responses, to assign points within your APPR plan. Although there are many ways to convert these results into points, here are a few examples. You could look at the growth in percent of students with favorable results on key areas from one round of administration to the next. Or look at teacher-student survey results compared to national norms. And finally, you may decide to look at a teacher-student survey results compared to other teachers within your district. Ultimately, it'll be up to each district to decide the purpose and appropriate process for using student perception surveys. NYSET is committed to providing districts and BOCES leaders support as they continue this critical work. A number of resources are available, including information on how surveys may be used in teacher and principal evaluation, lists of state-approved surveys for use in APPR, and outside resources that districts may choose to utilize when developing their own student perception surveys. Thanks to each of you for joining us today for this webinar. We look forward to hearing about your work with student perception surveys.